Principles of finance, a la shmup. Capital efficiency trade-offs. Where and how do I spend my cash? All right, well, let's take a look at a gnarly tractor smelting example case study. Today, you stamp out about 10 tractors a week in Bessie, your 38-year-old factory and plant. She's stalwart, wide-hipped, and sturdy. She did you proud, and, well, now she's fallen apart. It's a miracle she lasted this long. She was only warranted for 20 years, so 38 is like 2x, and you've already depreciated away all of her costs. So your tractor company appears to be very profitable from an earnings basis. In fact, it looks like this. Contribution margin is how much profit the unit generates for its N+1th unit. In this case, that $50,000 tractor sells at retail to dealers for 80 grand. And yes, the factory then, you'd say, wholesales it to those dealers for 50 grand. All right, well, the cost of the metal assembly, electronics, treads, engine, and so on is 40 grand. So the extra N+1th tractor generates $10,000 in contributed profits. Well, the company's summary income statement for last year looks like this. So this is a nice little company. Great tractors, independent, heartland America. But weirdly, there's nothing in the DNA line. Like, if the company had bought a plant some years ago, shouldn't there be a plug to depreciate it? Well, yes, but their CFO didn't take this course. Had she would have put in a line called sinking fund, or something similar, so it was budgeted on the line. Such that when old Bessie finally died and was resting comfortably, stuffed by the tractordermist and sitting by the fireplace, she'd have a replacement. The company shows kind of, quote, false, unquote, profits here, right? If a new basic plant cost $20 million and Bessie was fully depreciated 20 years ago, well, for the last 18 years, we probably should have been socking away a few nuts to fund the build of a new plant. And we should have deducted a bit more than $1 million a year to fund that. It would have come right off our taxes, but we didn't do that. We took the excess free cash and stupidly distributed it as dividends to the laborer owners. Why did we do that? Well, they wanted to get paid, understandably. Unfortunately, in the process, they robbed the company of cash resources to build a new plant now that this one was, pretty much done. How could this have happened? Well, the people in charge of dividend distribution were the highly tenured laborers, those who had been at the plant over 25 years. They were a year or two from retirement by the time Bessie was going to die, so why would they worry about long-term planning? Take the money and run, right? Well, that's why you have diversified boards, and it's a big issue when it comes to capital expenditures. If you don't have a range of voices speaking up for those who will be at the company 20 years later, well, you end up anemic at best. Luckily, despite the short-sighted financial management of capital, Tread on Me has had a great reputation as a builder of high-end tractors, and banks are happy to have the conversation about giving them a loan for a new factory. Well, a basic new one will cost $20 million, but allow the company to make the same 300 tractors now for $30,000 each instead of $40,000 that they'd been making them for before. And guess what? The new factory replaces 1/3 of the laborers with robots. Surprise, surprise. Maybe that's why the old guys took the money and ran instead of spending the plant capital on robots. And, well, the new plant is just generally more efficient with inventory, assembly, tracking, metrics, and so on. So on this new plant, the factory will hold all of the other variables to be the same. And instead of making 10 grand a unit of 300 in a year, 300 produced in a year, they'll make 20,000 in pre-tax profit or contribution per unit. That's double. So pre-tax profit is going to be $6 million, give or take. Remember that times interest covered ratio thing we covered before? Well, shoot, we're 3x and change here. The factory is $20 million, divide operating income of $6 million, and you get 20 over 6, about 3.3x. Well, that's pretty easy and easy to get to a yes on the basic factory build. In 3 years and change, the factory is fully paid off. The conservative founder of Tread on Me would rest easy, but the young whippersnappers angry about how the old guys left them are more greedy than fearful. They haven't lived through many bad economies, and they seek risk. They're ready to do the fancy factory, which will let them stamp out more tractors with more bells and whistles, albeit in an unproven marketplace, which may or may not want them fancy, right? All right, well, they can count on, for now, the same numbers as the basic factory sales going forward, right? So the question then is, how much could we spend on a new factory and still sleep at night? Well, the answer revolves around the cost cost of money and the time required for them to pay back that loan. If they had to pay everything back in 4 years, well, they couldn't afford much more than what they're spending in this $20 million version of capital for a basic factory. In theory, after year 3, if they had paid back, say, $15 million and owed just $5 million at that point, well, they could refinance and extend the payback terms if they had to. But let's say the board is worried about a global economic meltdown or the new Google driverless tractor. So they want, read my lips, no debt in 4 years, just like the bank does. Well, the money costs 5% and it is secured by the entire business. That is, if the company doesn't pay back the loan, the company is owned by the bank who loaned them the money. And the bank is betting that the entire company will be worth more than what they're loaning them the money for. So let's say the super duper factory is $40 million to build. Well, the company has $6 million in operating profits. They have to pay back the loan in 20 years, so they owe $2 million in principal each year, and they'll pay in year 1 5% of $40 million borrowed or $2 million in interest. The interest is deductible, the principal is not. So together, these two elements comprise $4 million in cash costs to the company each year. Doable? Yes. They have $6 million in profits here, plenty of cushion, and you can do the math. That $2 million goes against taxes, so instead of paying a third of their operating profits of $6 million in taxes or $2 million in taxes, they have taxable income now of $6 million minus the $2 million of interest costs, or taxable income of $4 million bucks, and then a third of that is $1.3 million. Note that as the principal owed declines, i.e. $40 million owed in year 1, then $38 million in year 2, and so on, the interest cost on that money declines as well. By year 10, Tread on Me owes $20 million on Super Duper at 5%, or just $1 million bucks a year in interest, half of what they started with. But as always, here at Shmup Central, there's a curveball. The economy tanks, Google cranks. And the next year, instead of selling 300 tractors like they had for decades, they only sell 200. So the board is thinking, woe is me, why did we ever upgrade Bessie? Well, for $4 million, we could have fixed her up and gone producing 300 tractors a year for another 10 years. Well, that math is totally different, of course. With almost no needs for capital expenditures, the company finds itself with tons of options and tons of taxes. Tread on Me, left with Bessie, continues for a decade or more with $10,000 per tractor in pre-tax profit or $3 million of pre-tax profit, and the cash builds up. And should the company pay a big dividend? Well, only equity holders get dividends, and only a relative handful of labor owners, maybe 10%, own equity shares in the company. The rest just get paid a salary, a small bonus if quotas are met, and a free turkey at Christmas. Will they feel unfairly treated if the company just hoards its cash? And oh, by the way, the company just got taxed 33% on its profits. If it pays a dividend, the employees get taxed a second time on that dividend. Fair? Doesn't matter. It's how the laws are set up. What else can the company do beyond upping the dividend? Well, it could just keep the cash. Boring, but good rainy day fodder. Does the board trust that management won't spend it stupidly? Maybe. The company could also use the excess cash to buy back its own stock. Fewer shareholders out there mean the same volume of cherry pie is shared with fewer mouths, so each eater gets more. But then the capital that probably should someday be used for a new factory has been given over to equity owners who are basically leaving the business. That is, when they sell out their equity stakes and move on, they no longer financially care whether the business is doing well or not. It's likely that some were at least partly responsible for the 300 tractors that got sold every year. So what happens now that those workers are gone? Does the Department of Agriculture still buy 5 tractors a year, or do those sales just go away to a competitor? Now, hopefully you get the idea here. Lots of moving parts, lots of choices with what you do with your free cash as a company. And factories matter. The spiffy new ones don't need humans, though, so, here's hoping you and the robots get along.